Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ollie Rock. Adam Lovingood is the General Counsel of Xero, a publicly traded technology company that provides cloud-based accounting software. Adam received his JD from Berkeley Law School and has since served in a wide variety of roles and industries, including television broadcasting, gaming, and education. In this podcast, Adam dives deep into his career and discusses the power of mentorship, building your network, and always staying positive. Hey, Adam, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Ellie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. I'd love to start with some icebreakers. So I'd like to begin by asking you if you could do any other profession and money was not an issue, what would it be?
I would be a musical theater performer if I possibly could have thought about it earlier, and yeah, would have taken the risk to do it because obviously it's a very challenging field. It's like anyone saying like they want to be a rock star or they want to be like a opera singer or something like that. I mean, it's to be successful at it, it's a very small percentage of people who can actually make that happen. But but I still love musical theater, and I sing when I can, and so that probably would be it. The other one is impractical as it sounds.
Amazing, amazing. And I guess the second one I had planned was your favorite way to blow off steam, but it's probably in the same category, I would imagine.
Um, I love walking, actually. I try to just go out and not necessarily have any particular place in mind to end up. There's this book called Wanderlust by Rebecca Solnit, who's a Bay Area writer. And she did this book, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, called A History of Walking. And it's this idea about the benefits or the transformational aspects of walking with no place in mind that you're going, just to discover. And I just, if I'm feeling overly stressed or just need a break, I'll just go for a walk. And sometimes I'll take meetings walking, just take my headphones with me. And it's just a very freeing thing to be able to do. So that's definitely my top one.
That's awesome. And San Francisco is one of the best places to do it, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. It's a wonderful walking city, despite the hills, but even, it gives you a bit of a workout as well, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, it's a wonderful walking city. It really is.
Awesome, Adam. So I'd love to talk about the beginning of your career. You obviously are a GC at Xero right now, which is amazing, but I'd love to take it back to your very beginning when you were at Berkeley Law School and kind of just start with like, how did you know that you wanted to be a lawyer?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when I was an undergrad, I explored a lot of different topics and areas of interest. I mean, I think I changed majors probably 8 or 9 times, to be honest with you. It was because every time I would take a new class, that was my favorite thing. I tend to be a very in the moment person, as I've been told, which, I'm very present. And so whatever I'm doing at the moment is the most important thing to me, but it doesn't necessarily lead to long-term planning when you're young and just wanting to explore and do a lot of different things. So I was pre-med. I was a history major. I was a psychology major. As I said, everything I took, just all of a sudden I loved that. So law took a while to get to. I knew that I had a lot of the attributes that a lawyer has or would have in terms of being analytical and being very logical in my approach. That helped with the science and math background, I think. But also liked sort of the more social interactive aspects of law, and how important it is to be able to connect with clients or people that you're working with or whatever it might be. I think for me, law is much more social in that aspect than maybe some other professions are, like medicine. Doctors are not necessarily known for their bedside manner, as the old trope goes. So I feel like that was one of the aspects that attracted me to law. I kind of just decided to go to law school because I wasn't quite sure what else to do. to be honest with you. I,
Interesting.
I, I decided I didn't want to go to medical school. Business school wasn't that attractive. Um, I thought I would just take the LSAT just to see how well I did. And I did reasonably well because I'm standardized tests are a strength. So that always helps when that's a requirement. Um, and so I thought, well, I'll see where I get in. And, I got into a few places that interested me, including Berkeley. Um, and so, yeah, I kind of fell into it in a way. But, the more I explored it and the more I started thinking more deeply about the possibility, obviously it was still attractive. And the more I learned, the more attracted I was. And Berkeley in particular spoke to me because of the uh, diversity of subject matter that they make available to to law students. You see a lot of at least this was the way it was when I first started looking at law schools. A lot of them take a much more traditional approach to legal education, which means that your array of courses or subject matter that's available to you is going to be fairly constrained, right? And I think Berkeley took quite a different approach to it, and so there was all kinds of different things that you could take, and that weren't sort of in the core area of law that most people study when they're in law school. So it was that, and it was also that Berkeley didn't rank. I still don't think they rank. Um, so that was also attractive because I really wanted to be able to explore legal education without being constrained by the typical environment that ranking or even um, typical letter grades can bring.
Got
So
it.
that
Yeah.
definitely attracted me
Because,
to it.
yeah, and you're talking about the way they grade, right? Which is just H, and P, right?
Yep, exactly.
Got it.
Yep.
And so can you talk a little bit about what that was like going to Berkeley Law School in the late 90s, right before the dot-com boom, and then transitioning to work in that industry afterwards?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it was, yeah, I think that when I started in 94, the internet was still new enough that I don't think anyone saw it as, a potential place to practice law necessarily. But things changed very quickly. And so I think by the time um, I got to the second year was when I think things were starting to pick up a little bit, and people were actually thinking that this might be something where you could actually bring legal training to bear. And that was around the same time that Berkeley brought in a professor who was more focused on technology and the law, and eventually started the technology law center, or there's a program there now that its focus is more specifically on that. But that was they're laying the groundwork at that point in time. Um, and then by the time I graduated, it was when things were starting to pick up a little bit, but there still weren't in-house roles yet. There were definitely law firms who were focusing on uh, assisting Silicon Valley firms or Silicon Valley startups and whatnot, but it wasn't at the level yet of really being able to say, oh, I want to work in house at a tech firm or a tech company. It was that wasn't quite feasible yet at that time, but it was a very dynamic period when things changed very quickly. I mean, from year to year. So it was a pretty amazing place to be at that time.
Did you have big law aspirations?
Not really, ever. I came into law school thinking I was going to do public interest work, and because one of the things that inspired me to go to law school was when I was an undergrad, I took a course called constitutional law. I ended up as a history major at the end. It's my last one that finally stuck
After 8 rounds.
after 8 rounds. Yeah, and there was a course in U.S. constitutional history that I took that I just absolutely loved. And what I loved about it was seeing the positive impact that attorneys could make on people's lives through this very long and tortured journey that various groups went on over the course of U.S. history to reach that basic level of protection and equality that should have been assumed from the beginning, right? And it was inspiring. It was eye-opening, and a lot of it's all stuff you already know, like from our history in terms of like Brown versus Board and the Plessy versus Ferguson, all the stuff that happened throughout our constitutional history. A lot of it's stuff you already know, but just being sort of in a position to really study it more deeply, it was inspiring. And as openly gay men at the time, we were very early in our journey as well, in the late '80s, early '90s, when I was undergrad, and that in part was what inspired me to go to law school, because I'm like, okay, I want to be part of that change and try to have some sort of an impact. And at the time, I thought, well, that required me to do public interest work to be able to make that change. And I was able to do some pretty cool projects when I was in law school to work on different cases that were making their way through the courts and whatnot. And so it was good to be a part of that. But to answer your question, I never really had big law firm aspirations, but most of the people who go to law school do. And it's kind of hard to fit in if that's not what you want to do, because everybody is sort of pushed in that direction. I mean, when you have the on-campus interviews and everything, 90% of the folks who show up are law firms. And so it's difficult to try to go a different path. I did interview with a few, but my heart was never in it, to be honest with you. So it wasn't for me. And I think it's probably proven to be, for me, to be the right choice.
Got it. But you did end up working at some boutique firms, right? Did you go into public interest?
I tried. I actually worked for in-house for a nonprofit as one of my first jobs. So I ended up cobbling together an early career through a lot of part-time gigs with a couple of law firms and a nonprofit. And I did apply for a lot of internships and grants for public interest work when I first graduated, which were all incredibly competitive because there are definitely fewer jobs available than those who want to go into them. Even though most people are geared towards law firm work, there are still quite a few people who want to do public interest work. And so, even though I still had that aspiration, I needed to pay the bills, so to speak. And so I started doing some other stuff. And one of those jobs was trying to carve out an in-house role within a nonprofit, and realizing that I really liked that, being inside an organization and trying to support, whatever legal work they might have from there. So that was, I think, what first sparked my interest in trying to do something in-house. I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't know how that was going to work out, but it sort of put that first thought in my mind that might be something I could do.
That's awesome. It's just interesting to look back on where sort of you started and see how you came up to be the general counsel at Xero. But I'm curious if you could maybe talk through your next role, which is really interesting, where you spent 6 years at MTV. What was that like?
That was really cool. I ended up there. A friend of mine from law school, he was working there and brought me in as part of the legal team, very small legal team initially, for a company that had been the result of a merger called Atom Shockwave. But both of those companies were very, very early movers in the space for online entertainment. And one was short films, but like film festival films, not necessarily what you see right now, but film festival films. And then the other was online gaming, but primarily streaming. And both of those brands kind of evolved in their own ways. The one company, Shockwave, the games part of the business, was one of the first ever to do subscription gaming. And of course, was very successful at it, but it was one of those things. This was like 2002, 2003. You're like, I don't know if this is going to work. Who would pay? Who would pay a subscription fee for a bunch of games? But it proved to be a very successful model. But in the early days of online entertainment, the only way you could make revenue was really advertising. Wow. Because no one had figured out yet how to monetize content, because the assumption was that no one was going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And you just had to make a compelling value proposition that someone would pay for and get them accustomed to paying. You start out with a really low subscription rate, right? Like $5 a month or something like that. And if they see value in it, they're going to continue.
Yeah.
And then you just go from there. So it was a very exciting time to be involved in that type of business. And then it continued to grow. And then eventually we were acquired by Viacom. MTV became part of the MTV group because they were looking for a digital presence because they didn't really have it because they were traditional media, television primarily. And rather than try to build it internally, very smartly, I think, they decided just to buy it. And so we became part of their well, not part of their digital division. We were their digital division. And but it was a huge transformation going from a company of like 100 people to this part of this huge corporation in the traditional media space. But it was fun. It was a good experience. Like I got very bored, to be honest with you. It was very, because you go from a job where you're working for a startup and have tremendous discretion in terms of what you can do as a legal advisor to this is what you can agree to. And anything outside that, you can't agree to it or you have to escalate it. And MTV, Viacom, they have tremendous leverage, right? As a negotiating partner. So you can say no. You can say, no, I'm not changing that indemnification provision. We never do that. And then the other party is more likely than not going to say, oh, okay, I thought I would try. It was a big shift in the way that in the satisfaction that I got from the work. And that's primarily why I left the company. But it was a good company.
Yeah, I mean, you were there for 6 years. Can you talk more, Adam? You said a friend referred you to
Mhm.
MTV initially. Can you talk more about how powerful having those connections is, and how powerful having a strong network is?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. It's um, I think that one of the benefits of Berkeley, and this is anecdotal, I'll be honest with you, but what I'm about to say, but I've heard others from other law schools talk about their experience in terms that were much more negative than I think my experience was at Berkeley. And I think the primary aspect of that I'm focusing on is that network and that connection. Like I feel like I graduated with some really strong friendships. I mean, one of my best friends, we're still friends, after
Wow.
30 years. And he was one of the first people that I met when I got there. But I have those friendships, I have those positive memories, and I think a lot of people come out of law school not necessarily having those. They'll build a network, but it's more of a professional network. Whereas I felt like my connections were more personal.
Yeah.
But yeah, you keep those relationships going, and it's incredible because you never know where people are going to end up, and where they're going to go, and they might leave someplace and open up a role for you. And actually, that's how I got my first in-house role, which was like with a company called Organic. And the same friend had been there and was going to another company, and his role opened up, and I took his role. And so it's very very important to keep an open mind, but keep those connections. And the weird thing with me, I think, is I've never liked networking for the sake of networking. Um, I I've I'm good. I think I'm good at forging relationships, meaningful relationships, but without any ulterior motive to it, right? And so I've never liked the artificial aspects of networking. But you don't necessarily have to do that. You meet people and you like people and you develop a relationship, and then when something comes up, you know you're going to come to mind.
Yeah. So you're saying just you really underestimate, people can really underestimate the power of that graduating class in law school, and how much those opportunities can help you down the line in ways you can't even really see when you're in school, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the good thing about Berkeley, I think, was it was drawing in, and I'm sure it still does, a really interesting group of people, right? This isn't necessarily 100% folks who are coming directly out of undergrad and they've always wanted to be a lawyer and they're going to law school and they're ticking the box and they're going to move on to a law firm. There were people who had had 2 or 3 careers before they came here. The class
Wow.
skewed a slightly older, um, people with other graduate degrees, people who'd been in government before, academics. We had one doctor, like
Wow.
medical doctor. Um, it was just fascinating. People who come from social work backgrounds. I mean, I just loved it. And so when you have that such a fascinating group of people, um, it's easy to make connections, right? Like, it's easy to say, "Oh, I like you. Let's go have coffee or something like that," and start building that relationship um, more organically. And I think that's really, if you choose your law school well, you can have that kind of experience. And I think that's you know probably one of the biggest benefits you'll find.
Yeah, really powerful insights, Adam. Can you now talk maybe more about your stint of in-house roles leading up to when you did Lovingood Consulting, which I assume was when you were working for yourself? I'd love to hear more about working in-house before that and then starting to work for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. When I left MTV, I actually left to start a an online business that was not legally related at all, and my timing was horrible because that was right before Lehman Brothers. So it wasn't the best time to be starting a company of any sort.
What year?
Um, this was late 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, really, really awful. So it forced me to kind of rethink what I was going to do next, and obviously legal was what I knew and what I wanted to fall back on. And at the time, I think I was really, I don't want to say intent on, but definitely contemplating getting out of the law completely,
Oh, wow.
um, because I saw it. I think I saw it at the time as somewhat constraining. Um, and so I was looking for other things. And I don't think what I realized at the time is I didn't have to give up one thing to do the other thing, right? I was still very focused on here's your day job and that's what you do and make money at, and everything else is just kind of fun. And I didn't see that there's a whole spectrum of opportunities that you can exploit. Part of which is the day job that can lead to other interesting things as well. So I was seeing it as very black and white terms, I think. But that period of time, challenging time for everyone economically and globally from an economic standpoint, it really forced me to kind of think more broadly about what I wanted to do and how I would use the skills that I had. So I did some consulting and I worked through agencies on like short-term projects. I knew enough people from my time at MTV and a lot of people who had left to start their own businesses that I could start making those connections and say, hey, if you need some contracts reviewed, or because a lot of these, early stage startups, they don't have an attorney in house. Then go to a law firm, but they're going to pay a lot of money. So I was kind of in a good position to say, like, I'll give you a good rate for this type of work. And actually, off and on, but when I would go from jobs to jobs, and I would have some time, between jobs, I would go back to that and get back into that network and say,
Reach out to former connections.
and the Bay Area is perfect for that, right? Because somebody's always going somewhere else and doing something else, right? You've got a company that does well, and people cash out and they go start their own thing, which is incredibly exciting. I've been on advisory boards. But I think it goes back to that relationship piece where forge your relationships, really engage with people on a human level. Um, and those are the relationships that you can take with you later, wherever they end up, wherever you end up. And if they like you and they trust you, you're in good shape. And you can always manage to find something to do. And you never know where that thing that you're finding is going to take you. And so I think that's my next sort of full-time job after things started getting better, 2009 or so, started picking up a little bit. I got a connection through someone I'd worked with before, who said, "Yeah, this he had someone he had worked with previously at can't remember what law firm they worked together, but they'd worked together previously at a law firm." And he said, "She's looking for a second attorney in her small legal department, and would you like to talk to her? I'm like, sure. So I went and talked to her, and we hit it off, and I was there for 2.5 years, working with her, and left there to go to another company that was in the educational technology space called Rafter, which no longer exists. And but that was really good for me because it was the first time I was kind of the solo attorney in an office, because I did report into the general counsel, but he was elsewhere. He had decided to move to Austin, Texas, and so he needed someone on the ground in San Mateo, which is where the company was based, and so he could live in Austin. And so I was the legal presence in San Mateo for the company of 150 people.
Wow.
And so I had a tremendous amount of independence, and had been in my career long enough at that point that I felt comfortable doing that, right? I felt confident, like I know what I'm doing. And so that was the first time that I think I really felt, I don't want to say that I had arrived. That doesn't sound right. But I felt a level of confidence and comfort in my role that I'd never felt before.
Yeah,
Everybody suffers to a certain degree.
10 years post graduating, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, by then it was probably about 15.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting because everybody suffers a bit from imposter syndrome, especially when you're first starting out, because you're first starting out, you really don't know anything. Law school doesn't teach you anything about how to be a lawyer, right? I mean, really, it teaches you how to be a law student, which is what it amounts to. And then you graduate and you take a course to teach you how to take the bar. And then you start working, and that's, legal work is really about apprenticing more than anything else. And so that's where you learn how to be a lawyer. And so, you're starting out and you really don't know anything. You have to learn it. And it takes a long time because there's, especially in the tech space, there's so much to know and it's constantly changing. You really have to get to the point where you're so comfortable and confident in your skills and your judgment, right? Being in-house is really more about judgment than anything else. That you get to the point where you're like, okay, I've got this. Right? It's like,
yeah,
I'm okay with this. I'm comfortable being independent and on my own, and checking in with my boss when I need to. But for the most part, I'm feeling like I'm at the point in my career where I feel like I'm that person.
Yeah, and would you say working in big law would potentially fast track that confidence, or would you say it's the same whether you're working in-house or not?
I think it's possible. I think it depends on where you go. And I mean, I've seen enough people over the years, and I think law firm culture is changing, obviously, from what it was even 10, 15 years ago. But most law firms were not very pleasant places to be, I think, traditionally, and it was more trial by fire, and I think you ended up getting, and I think this is still true to a certain degree, you end up learning a particular area deeply, right? If you're in M&A, you're going to be looking at hundreds of stock purchase agreements over the course of several years. And so you know what they look like and you know what to expect. And so you have a deep understanding of that area. Working in-house is very different from that because you're going really out rather
So
than down.
dynamic.
Yep. And so your perspective inevitably has to be pretty broad. So I think when you're working in a law firm, I think it would be very difficult to get that breadth of perspective. So they're very different. They're very different roles. And again, I'm not saying that you can't. Your point about confidence, I think, is well taken. Though I mean, I think if you're in the right firm, have the right mentors, end up with a really good partner who's human and vulnerable and authentic and all that stuff. That I know there are partners out there like that. Yeah, you can really at least get enough confidence in your area to then take that and go more broadly if you decide to go in-house.
Got it. And before we talk about Lovingood Consulting, did you have a mentor throughout this time?
Um, I didn't have anyone in particular. I think I relied very heavily on my bosses over the years to be those in those mentoring positions. Now, and I know there's a for some people they feel very strongly about your boss can't be your mentor, that needs to be somebody else. And I can see that perspective. I don't think it always works that way. And so I looked because I've always had very good, positive relationships with my bosses, and most of them have become friends, after I left the company or after they left the company. And so I've always found those relationships to be very deep and meaningful, and I've gotten a lot from them. And they didn't necessarily need to be, because, sometimes you think of a mentor as being someone who's older, and it wasn't necessarily always that case. It could have been somebody who, and sometimes who's younger than I was at the time. And there's always something to learn, right? Because they've had their career journey, which was different from yours, and they're going to have stuff that they've learned that you haven't, and that you weren't privy to, and so I think it's and even from peers, you can learn a lot from peers as well. So I think
Yeah.
it's just having an open mind and kind of a broad perspective on
Putting your
on
ego
who
aside a
you
little
can learn
bit.
from. What's that?
And putting your ego aside a little bit, maybe?
Oh yes. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. One of the best compliments I ever had um, working in house was, and I think this was at when I was working at Adam Entertainment slash MTV when we became that, and our CFO once commented on our legal department, and she's like, "Our legal department doesn't have an ego." And I'm like, that was one of the best compliments to this day that I've ever, because in my current job we talk about ownership without ego, right? Because it's not about, oh, I don't care, or I don't feel invested in this. It's just like, no, I'm one part of it,
Hmm.
and I can feel very invested in it and be proud of what I'm doing, but then not absorb that so much that I take it personally and feel like it's my personal thing, and then I'm going to
And
get
then you
upset if
stop
somebody else
learning.
changes it. Yep. Yep.
And Adam, I'd love to double click on, like, as a young lawyer or fresh graduate, like, what are some of the ways that you can vet the person you're going to be working for, whether it's a manager or a partner? Because in many ways, that's going to shape your career.
Yeah.
So how would you go about? What kind of advice would you give to folks that are evaluating that?
Um, be fearless, because I think that unfortunately, when you're looking for a job as a candidate, you don't have a lot of power in that relationship, right? You want a job, you probably need a job. So it's difficult. It's difficult to really, you'll ignore red flags, right? You're like, I need this job. Um, if you are entertaining multiple offers, or you are considering, various, a variety of companies, um, I make sure that you are going into it with an understanding that it's kind of due diligence in a way, right? It's kind of exploring the opportunity. Because one of the questions I've always hated in the context of interviews, and I've corrected the person before in a nice way, um, is, "Oh, why do you want to work for us?" Well, I don't know if I want to work for you. That's what this interview process is all about. Because you might get to the end of the interview process, and you might even get an offer, and you're like, you know what? I actually don't think I want to work there.
Yeah.
And you've probably made that determination before you get to that point, right? But it's don't ignore red flags. How human a person is incredibly important. Like, I remember one of the worst interview processes I ever went through was at a startup, early trading, stock trading startup in San Francisco. And it's when I was coming back to the Bay Area after having been in Atlanta, because I went back there after law school, and then moved back here in the early 2000s. And it was for a compliance position, a legal compliance position, because they didn't have an in-house legal team. per se. And I think this was the third round of interviews, and the first two were great. I met like the HR person. I met some of the trading people, and office managers. Everything had been fantastic. CFO, lovely guy, and the CEO was a horrible person, and he was the last interview, and just the stereotypical obnoxious trading person that you see on TV in TV and movies all the time. Just really, really not a nice guy at all. And I remember leaving that interview like, I would never work for this company. And I remember I refused to send him a thank you email afterwards. I sent everyone else a thank you email. Everyone else was lovely, and I'm like, oh my God, how do you people put up with him, right?
Yeah.
And it was sort of that old, the brilliant, the brilliant asshole or whatever. I don't know if I didn't say that on here, but I don't know how else to frame it. That people have put up with traditionally over the years, rather than saying that, you don't have to be like that. You can be a firm, confident leader and be nice and human and authentic. And I think that is what I look for more than anything else is am I going to like this person? And that might sound silly because you're like, well, it's a job. You don't have to like the person. Well, you don't have to, but you probably should, right? Because you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, and you want to like them, you want to respect them. So yeah, don't ignore those red flags. Again, I totally recognize that some people, you don't have a lot of choice if you have to work, and sometimes you take what you can get and you'll move on from there. But if you have the luxury of being able to think more deeply about where you're going, then the human factor is, to me, beyond all others.
Yeah, it's such a powerful thing to hear from someone like you who's in a leadership position, is that you don't have to be ruthless to be a good leader.
Yep.
And it is a symbiotic relationship when you're applying for these jobs, but you don't always have leverage. So it just makes it kind of tough. But like you're saying, you probably just want to ask the right questions, do your due diligence. And if it's not the right fit, walk away if you have to, kind of a thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Let's talk about your most recent gigs. And if you want to talk about Lovingood Consulting, I'd love to hear about that. And then potentially about Ask.com.
Yeah. Lovingood Consulting was sort of the one that I would go back to periodically whenever I had opportunities to do work between kind of permanent roles. And over the years, it became, something that I actually considered doing full time. I wouldn't go back to an in-house role. I would just do this. And because over the years, again, as I sort of collected relationships from different companies, I was able to, have a decent pool of clients that I would go back to on a regular basis, or sometimes it would just be a one-off, right? If because again, when you're consulting with startups that are really, really early stage, they may not be around for very long, right? So their needs for your services may not be long term. But the thing I did like about it was very flexible. You can work when you need to. You have control over everything. What you charge. What you work on, if it's something that you don't feel like you either want to work on or you feel like you can because it's not your area of expertise. It's just very easy to pass that on to someone else, with someone else in your network that you can share it with, or it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. So I did like that. For me, I like the structure of a company. I like being in a company. So as an external consultant, you just don't get, for me, you don't get the same degree of satisfaction and the same degree of personal investment in what you're doing as you do when you're working in-house. So as much as I like the consulting part because of its flexibility, I like being part of a team. Whether it's the legal team or the broader company, and learning everything about the company, right? And being around long enough to remember, what happened 4 years ago in this situation and what impact that has on what you're doing right now. I like that feeling of having that much investment in a company. At Ask was fascinating because again, another referral from someone that I knew because
Wow.
they had someone who was needing someone to come in and help out, and um, she was asking like I'm trying to think about how to describe it. It was almost like a because it's the overall group is IAC Corp, which is not consumer facing. It's just a conglomeration of a lot of different brands, including Ask. And so what you had within the company was like little mini legal departments all over that supported various brands. And each one of those was a GC. And so the GC for Ask.com needed some help because she was overwhelmed. And so I went in to meet with her, and then we hit it off. And so I started supporting the brand there initially as a consultant, and then eventually I got hired because what I didn't realize was she brought me in so she could leave. So, and stop practicing law. She didn't want to practice law anymore. She just like completely left the game.
Wow.
Started flipping houses with her husband, I believe. I don't know if she's still doing that. Um,
Good for her.
but that was a fascinating career journey because I think over the course, I was there for about 2.5 years, and I think I had like 7 different bosses during that period of time.
Oh my gosh.
Um, it was a very it was a place that went through a lot of change constantly because they were always bringing in brands and then selling them, and they kind of flip companies. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was but and I didn't know anything about the search space before that, so I learned a
Yeah.
lot about that and search engine optimization and all the things that they do to as part of their business model. But then they also had a very broad portfolio of different types of companies. Match.com is one of their brands, which is probably one of the best known brands. And then they had a group of companies in Europe, and they purchased a social media site from Eastern Europe and needed someone to support that as well as the other European properties. So that's how I ended up in Europe running
In Dublin?
in Dublin, running the legal function for the European properties for IC.
Nice.
Um,
You've just been in so many different industries, so much change. I mean, you've probably just had so much experience with so many different things. Looking back on your time when you had, multiple bosses over 2 years, I could see that as being maybe a negative thing in the moment, but probably looking back on it, maybe I'm assuming you're grateful for being in such a fast-paced environment. Like what kinds of things did it teach you?
um, it taught me to try to look for the positive elements of the relationship in each situation because these were all very different people in terms of their personalities and where they were on the niceness scale kind of thing as well. Because you don't if you inherit a boss and you're already at a company, it's not like an interview process, right? Where you're like evaluating whether you want to work with this person or not. It's like you get them, and there you are.
And you have to prove yourself again and again, I
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah. I think I just again tried to connect with each person on a personal level. Some I really liked, and some I tolerated. And but assume positive intent. Even if they don't always display that, and work from there, and try to um, help them, and get them what they need,
Manage
and
up.
manage up, and try to um, emphasize as much as possibly can what's working with the relationship. And I was senior enough at this point where I was trusted. I knew what I was doing. I didn't need them to guide me on any of the stuff that I was working on. It was more, you still have a boss, right? And they still expect something from you, whatever that might be, and you just need to figure out what that thing is and give it to them. And with some folks, that's easier than others. Like
Absolutely.
I had one boss that I never met with. I mean, if I had something we needed to discuss, I would raise it with her, and she'd find some time. Um, and then I had a subsequent boss who wanted to meet every week, and whether we had stuff to talk about or not, which of course was had me scrambling for trying to find stuff to fill the time because I didn't want that dead air there, or for him to take that as an opportunity to bring something else up that I didn't want to deal with necessarily to find work for me. That's kind of sometimes the worst situation to be in, especially if you're busy. Um,
Yeah.
but it's you can usually find something positive with whoever you're working with.
Yeah, all of your advice revolves around just really forging those personal relationships. So I think
Yeah.
that's a big takeaway for me, at least, is just how important that is to get below the surface and like
Hmm.
get to know someone on a personal level. Because it's just so easy to have that like shallow surface level relationship and just think like, okay, hard work equates to promotion or reward.
Yep.
And it's just, there's so much more than that. There's so many soft factors like EQ that go into it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really, if you can focus on that, um, the the personal satisfaction you'll get from the work that you do is just so much greater, because it doesn't necessarily matter what project you're working on. It's all about that personal connection. I mean, I genuinely enjoy spending time with my team, and a lot of the folks that I work with at Xero. It's just like I enjoy seeing them. Right? It's like seeing a friend. If I visit an office, I go down to Southern Hemisphere a couple of times a year in Melbourne and Auckland, and it's like it really is like seeing a friend. And especially during COVID, when folks weren't able to get together in person, when we finally were, it was really like a homecoming.
Wow.
Um, and it's that way because that is what really matters, is that personal connection, and the rest of it is just you'll figure it out, right? You'll get to where you need to go, but that's the foundation, right? That you're building on.
Amazing, amazing. And that's a good transition to talk about how you got to Xero. I mean, maybe we could briefly touch on your time at Udacity and Flex by Fenwick, and then how things came about at Xero. And I'm curious if these jobs came from connections as well.
Uh, yes. Short answer. Um, Fenwick. So I'll start with that one because that was sort of the longer relationship. Uh, Fenwick and West decided to start this program, and I think it was back in 2011, um, as sort of an experiment, because what they were finding is that they had a lot of really small clients, like startup clients, who needed some support, but not like the full suite of services that a full service law firm would offer. And more importantly, they didn't have the money to pay for it. So uh, what Fenwick decided to do was create this as sort of an add-on service for their clients, and say, okay, we can, these attorneys that they were putting in Flex by Fenwick were not attorneys of the law firm, so they weren't cannibalizing the work. In other words, they weren't doing it that way. They were like, we'll bring in some attorneys who can work flexibly, um, and provide services to these clients who need something unique, like more in-house type work. And I was totally fascinated by that. And I, I'm trying to remember how I made the connection, but I can't really remember how I made the connection with them. I don't know if I answered an ad on LinkedIn or how it was, but however it was, I got in and went through an interview process, which was rather stringent, and you had to do a test. They gave you a software license that they wanted you to redline, and then you had a role play with them where they were the client, the in-house client, and you had to go through and explain your changes to the software license. It was fascinating and kind of fun, actually, because you don't often get that as part of an interview process. But anyway, I sort of was brought into their stable of attorneys, and sort of went in and out of that relationship over the years, because I would sort of take myself out of the running when I went in-house permanently, and then I would go back when I went out. So it was always that sort of a coming and going relationship that I had with them, which has been really beneficial. So when I came back from Dublin, so Ask basically sold all the properties that I was supporting in Europe, and I had no job anymore. So I came back to the Bay Area, and one of the bosses that I had from Ask had the boss that I never met with, who I had a great relationship with, was now at Udacity. She was general counsel there, and she was getting ready to go on a vacation. She's like, I need time away. I'm going to go. I need to be away for like a month, and I need somebody to come in and be the GC while I'm away. And she's like, I can't think of anyone else that I would recommend for this. So I did that, and then just continued doing consulting work for her on the side, even after she got back, because I was kind of taking some time off post Dublin, because I'm like, I need to take my time and find the right fit for me, and I don't want to rush into it. So if I can, do little bits here and there, that's good enough. And then signed up again with Fenwick in the meantime as well. I was like, hey, I'm back, and so it was Fenwick actually who sent me to Xero, because Xero had signed up with them to get somebody to come in and do some project work for them. And the Xero had just hired a new GC. She'd been there for a few months, and she had a completely different approach to running an in-house team than her predecessor had. And so I think she was struggling a little bit with how to fix the team. Not fix the team, that's not fair, but how to get them to see her vision.
Are you talking
and so I remember interviewing
process?
with her. What's that?
Sorry, Adam. Are you talking like process or management style? Like what specifically do you mean?
I think everything. Like,
Okay.
I think part of it was management style, because she was also remote. She was in Australia, and half the team at that time was in the US. They only had I think 9 attorneys total. And 4 team members, one was a paralegal, 4 of the team members were in San Francisco, actually. And so I think it was cultural. I think it was management style. I think it was just sort of the whole assuming positive intent was probably not there, because she was all about transparency, and it's not like I'm checking on what you're doing. It's like, I just want to know what you're doing so I can help, or we can. She was very in our legal department takes very much an agile approach to the projects that we work on. So it is really about you need to know what other folks are working on so you can help them start, or move stuff around, prioritize, all that stuff. And so that's where she was coming from, and I think the team here thought she was checking on them and not trusting them, and so it was. What's that?
Micromanaging.
Yeah, they saw it as micromanaging, and so one of the first conversations I had with her was really about perspective and approach, and it was almost more of a philosophical conversation, I think, than anything else, about what how you view in-house work and how you approach it, and innovation. She wanted to talk a lot about innovation and how you innovate within a legal department, and what that means. And it was probably one of the hardest interviews I've ever had, but also quite beneficial. It was fun. I mean, I enjoyed talking to her because she was definitely testing me, I think, in a certain degree, but in a way that made sense. And so I think she saw that we were very closely aligned on the way that we thought about in-house work, especially in the context of a global company. And so I went in there almost 7 years ago this month.
And how big was the company? Because I think it's 5,000 people now?
It's about 5,000. I think at the time it was probably
3,000?
Yeah. 2,500 to 3,000, I think, at the time. The U.S. at that time was probably 400 of that. We didn't have a Canadian presence at that point. We did have a UK presence, but it was still mostly New Zealand and Australia. I think at that point...
You said 9 attorneys total?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And what is it now?
Now we have our entire team is about 50 people.
Wow.
50 to 55, but so that includes like government relations and product compliance. And in terms of actual attorneys, like the GC function is probably about 35.
Got it.
And, Canada, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand as well. I think that's it, actually. So kind of like five main regions in terms of where folks are located, but spread across probably about a dozen different offices.
Good.
But it was a good place. It was a good time to come in because they were sort of resetting not only the legal function but also the U.S. market as well. Because we also had a new president of the Americas, which was basically you know North and South America. We don't have much of a presence in South America, but it was U.S. and Canada was really what it amounted to. But she had just come in and had taken over just a couple of months before I came in. And they had some new folks in charge of sales, one person who came over here from New Zealand who had worked there for a while and kind of understood the approach that they'd taken there to grow the market. So it was a time of a lot of change and a lot of really exciting change. And so I think I came in at probably just the right moment for that. So, yeah.
Amazing. And you've been promoted several times to ultimately becoming the GC. Can you talk about what kinds of things, what kind of work did you do to like what happened to get those promotions?
Um, I think it's really about relationships again, because you have people who advocate for you because they like you and they like your work. And I was able to come in and get some stuff done that previously had just sort of been, you know, I don't know, in process. There was this one. So some of it was timing. I think there was this one deal that had been going on for like a year, and I was able to come in and help the team, work with the team to close it out. Probably within the first 6 weeks I was here, and I was working with the president of the Americas and their head of business development, and just I liked them both, and they liked me, and we worked well together. And so then they advocate for you, right? And so the Americas, the president of the Americas, Carrie Goman, she said, "I want you on my leadership team." And it was the first time that an attorney had sat on a business leadership team at Xero, short of the
Wow.
GC. And so that was a fantastic experience because I was seen as a full business partner, not just the attorney, right? And so from that, I was hired permanently and became the head of legal for the Americas, and then was on her leadership team from there. But then she got promoted into a C-suite level position where she was in charge of kind of strategy and business development. Is not quite right, but that's kind of what it was. We were trying to move more into a platform rather than just a SaaS company. We're trying to move into platform as a service. And so she was kind of put in charge of that. And because of the relationship that I built with her, she wanted me to go with her for that role and become part of that LT. And so that moved me up from my previous regionally focused position to a globally focused position.
Wow.
And then it kind of went from there. I ended up, we brought in an M&A person. He reported into me. We sort of built out functions from there to focus on areas of strategy and partnerships, because that was another area of focus of mine previously. And so it just kind of grew from there. And then when our chief legal officer, the woman who hired me, when she left back almost 2 years ago, the company had to decide what to do with the role, chief legal officer, because we had a company secretary. We'd never had a GC before, like I am. And so they sort of restructured the department to have a chief legal officer / company secretary and a general counsel. And with the general counsel kind of running the legal function, which is what we do today.
Nice.
So it's been great. it's been nice to be at a company who, you know, will give you those opportunities for growth, right? And it's that's not always the case. And I think that Xero is probably the only company that I've been in where I also feel like business opportunities are available to you as well, right? They don't pigeonhole you into, well, you're just a lawyer. One of our attorneys I worked very closely with when I first came in moved from the legal team to a business development role. So he's the head of business development for Europe right now,
That's
and he's been
awesome.
in that role for a couple of years and really likes it. And he had done a lot of partnerships in his legal role and had forged the relationship with those business development folks. So when they had an opening, they thought of him, which I think that's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
They like you so much that they want to work more closely with you.
Yeah, Zero sounds like such a great company, and I mean, you're so positive, Adam, and your career is just so impressive. Before we kind of wrap here, is there any anecdotes you'd give to folks that where their goal is to become the GC of a company like Zero, to leading a legal team and making business decisions? What advice would you give for folks who are early in their careers that want to be in a position like yours?
Um, be curious about everything, I think, because if you're working in house, especially if you're working at a startup, and you will at some point work in a small legal team for a startup if you want to do this. But yeah, try to know everything is not the right way to say it, but be curious about everything, right? Like you want to because the more you can understand about how the company operates and what they want to do, what they want to accomplish, the customer problem they're trying to solve, the better you're going to be at your job. And a lot of the stuff you'll learn, you won't necessarily apply in the legal context. But when you view yourself as not just a legal advisor, but a business advisor who happens to focus on the legal area, that opens up tremendous opportunities for you to think more broadly about your role. And that's where the fun is, right? It's not sitting in your box and saying, well, I won't do the X or Y because that's not part of my role. It's like, no, I want to learn about that, right? I want to know, what are you doing over there? Why are you doing that? Why are we building that product feature like that? What are some of the customer service problems that you're encountering right now, right? I may or may not be able to help with that, but it's fun to know about it. And the more pieces of the puzzle you can put into place, you're going to have a clearer picture, and then you'll know where you can bring your skills to bear, whatever they might be, and they might not be just legal. And so you can know more about where you can add that value, and that's ultimately what you want to do.
Fantastic, fantastic. I really like your advice, Adam. Just having an open mind, putting your ego aside and forging those relationships are things it sounds like you really harp on. So I really, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for providing such powerful insights, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, same here, Ollie. I really appreciate the opportunity to share and to chat, and it was my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. We are